It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here. Of course, he's going to talk about iCloud security, what we know and what we think might have happened. And we'll take a look at email encryption. Is PGP the best way to go, or are there alternatives that are better? Stay tuned. Security Now is next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit. Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 471, recorded September 2nd, 2014. PGP, time for an upgrade? Security Now is brought to you by Carbonite. Whether you have one computer at home or several at your small business, Carbonite backs up your files to the cloud automatically and continually. Plus, access your files anytime, anywhere with a free app. Start your free trial at Carbonite.com. No credit card required. Use the offer code SecurityNow, and you'll get 2 bonus months with purchase. And by ProXPN. ProXPN is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it should be, anonymously and without oversight. Save 50% off with a 12-month subscription. Go to proxpn.com/twit and use the code SN50 at checkout. And by audible.com. To download the free audiobook of your choice, go to audiblepodcast.com/securitynow. Time for Security Now, the show that brings you the latest security news. And boy, this is going to be a good one. Steve Gibson is here. He's the explainer-in-chief from the Gibson Research Corporation, creator of SpinRite. We talk about that, but also the discoverer and writer of the very first spyware, anti-spyware program. He's been a long time foe of hackers and exponent of strong security. And we've been doing this show now and we're our 9th year.
And I have webcams surrounding me, Leo. I've got webcams all over the place.
Why?
I'll tell you about that a little bit later in the show.
All right. Hi, Steve. Yep. Welcome. Good to talk to you.
We have a great, a bunch of news. You were talking about it through the first half of MacBreak Weekly, this iCloud, iBrute, iHack with, fun with naked celebrities. We have the Russians are coming. Another bad problem, actually really bad problem, with consumer Wi-Fi routers. A recent concern over fake cell phone. Everyone calls them fake cell phone towers, only because they typically are towers. In this case, they're actually base stations. CryptoLocker clone. I wanted to chat with you briefly about something that I forgot to pick up last week, which is China's operating system, and I've heard you talk about it several times on other podcasts. A brief update on Squirrel, which is why I'm surrounded by webcams. New trouble with RAID 5, which is interesting. And then our main topic is to look at email encryption. It's sort of nominally about PGP because it was triggered by Matthew Green who's the cryptographer at Johns Hopkins, about his blog posting, which itself was triggered by the Google and Yahoo announcements they're going to be offering email encryption. So we're going to sort of do a retrospective and prospective look at that whole issue of email encryption. It turned out to be a little bit less specifically about PGP. PGP is just sort of a convenient, whipping horse. Is that a phrase?
Yeah.
Whipping
post. Stalking horse or whipping post. I don't know.
To mix some metaphors. So yeah, lots to talk about, and I think a great podcast.
Yeah. And I have a lot of interest in email encryption. I've used PGP to sign my mail for years, and I am very well aware of all the issues just from a point of view of a user that come up. I've recently switched over to SMIME just because it's a little more straightforward. So I'm curious about this.
You mentioned that before, and I loved the way Matthew concluded his blog. He said, "I realize I found a bit cranky about this stuff, but as they say, a PGP critic is just a PGP user who's actually used the software for a while."
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, I'll give you some color play-by-play as we go along here
from the field.
Yeah. Oh. But I do want to mention our sponsor today because we have a great one. And in a way, this sponsor would eliminate a lot of the problems people experience due to security flaws like crypto locker. I'm talking about Carbonite Online Backup, the best way to secure your data, whether you're at home or at a small business. Carbonite is automatic, continuous online backup. Backs it up to the cloud. I know there are those of you who say, well, how secure is it? Well, I can tell you this. Not only does it use SSL during all backup processes, but it allows you to do trust no one encryption. Only you have the key. Now, some features that we talk about with Carbonite, of course, you can't have, for instance, access to that data from other devices if you're using trust no one encryption. So, but it does make it possible. And I think for people, especially listening to Security Now, especially in light of these iCloud failure, this is very good to know. You can secure this stuff end-to-end encryption so that even if your account were hacked or even if somebody at Carbonite were compromised, it wouldn't be visible to them. I think that's really important. They have solutions for business as well, a Carbonite appliance that does local and off-site backup. That's fabulous. It is easy to use. It's one of the reasons we talk about Carbonite a lot on the radio show is it's the kind of thing even inexperienced or non-sophisticated users can turn on and just forget. It will work. Your free trial awaits you at Carbonite.com. If you use our offer code SECURITYNOW during the free trial, you'll get 2 bonus months when you decide to buy. You pay once a year, $59.99 a year and there is no limit on the data, by the way. You're only limited by the amount of your bandwidth, frankly. There's no limit to how much you can upload. You don't have to meter it, and they don't either. That's less than $5 a month for a computer. They have small business, external drives, network-attached storage plans. And you'll note for a limited time, you can get even more savings if you buy for 2 or 3 years. Carbonite is a great deal. Try it right now, free. No credit card required. And if you decide to buy, use the offer code SECURITYNOW. That'll let them know you heard about it right here. We appreciate it if you do that. Carbonite.com. All right, Steve, where do we start with this big lineup here?
So, you were talking for the first half of Mac Break Weekly pretty much about this iCloud breach. And I think it's significant that we don't really have proof yet from anything that Apple has told us that, like the nature of the breach. Certainly, it was wrong for the Find My iPhone interface not to have any sort of lockout. And so what we do know, and this could be completely tangential to the fact that 100 celebrities got personal and private parts uploaded to the internet. But what we do know is that on GitHub there was a project called iBrute, and it just leveraged the fact that the API for Find My iPhone had no rate limiting and no failure lockout of any sort, which clearly was an oversight on Apple's part. Again, it's one of those where we're back to our classic trade-off of security and convenience. If they have a lockout, some people are going to lock themselves out, and like it's well, and whereas like the next guess of their many passwords that they use might have been right, but the lockout occurs just before they get to that one, and now they can't get in, and then they've got to go to do I forgot my password at Apple. So.
And we should point out that, and we read this on Mac Break Weekly, but Apple has put out a statement in which they said there is no flaw in iCloud or Find My iPhone. They, by the way, fixed that rate limiting issue yesterday.
Yes, immediately.
And they said that it was, in fact, an individualized attack that utilized secret questions, among other things. So,
well. And that leads me perfectly into the next point, which is we covered a couple of weeks ago the news about the discovery of the massive database in South Central Russia of nominally 4.5 billion email addresses and names, which when filtered and dupe eliminated and sorted through, still left us with 1.2 billion names. Now, the reason I bring this up is that there is a DNS, a domain name registrar, DNS and website hosting provider by the name of Namecheap, who yesterday blogged their urgent security warning about the fact that their site was under attack. And Mark Russell, who's the VP of their hosting services, posted yesterday on Labor Day, and what he put down was just very responsible, and I think so clear. I just want to share it. He said, overnight, our intrusion detection systems alerted us to a much higher than normal load against our login systems. Upon investigation, we determined that the username and password data gathered from third-party sites, likely the data identified by the register, is being used to try and gain access to Namecheap.com accounts. The group behind this is using the stored usernames and passwords to simulate a web browser login through fake browser software. This software simulates the actual login process a user would use if they are using Firefox/Safari/Chrome, any of the standard browsers, to access their Namecheap account. The hackers are going through their username password list and trying each and every one to try to get into Namecheap user accounts. The vast majority of these login attempts have been unsuccessful as the data is incorrect or old and passwords have been changed. As a precaution, we are aggressively blocking the IP addresses that appear to be logging in with the stolen password data, because those can't be spoofed. You have to have a TCP connection, so you have the IP address of the source. I'm just adding there. And he goes on. We're also logging these IP addresses and we'll be exporting blocking rules across our network to completely eliminate access to any Namecheap system or service, as well as making this data available to law enforcement. While the vast majority of these logins are unsuccessful, some have been successful. To combat this, we've temporarily secured the Namecheap accounts that have been affected and are currently contacting customers involved, requesting they improve the security of these accounts. So then I skipped a bunch, and then he says, he concludes, I must reiterate, as Apple did, this is not a security breach at Namecheap, nor a hack against us. The hackers are using usernames and passwords being used that have been obtained from other sources. These have not been obtained from Namecheap, but these usernames and passwords that the hackers now have are being used to try to log into Namecheap accounts. Our early investigation shows that those users who use the same password for their Namecheap account that are used on other websites are the ones who are vulnerable.
Yeah, so it's not even a Namecheap attack. It's correct. It's using the same password.
Well, and so what's interesting is the coincidence of these two unrelated except in time attacks. That is, this sounds like exactly the attack that went after Find My iPhone, which was not being monitored and was not rate limited and didn't have any X number of mistakes against the account. So it, again, hypothesizing here, but this could also be the same attack on Apple could be what Namecheap has saw and is now blocking, which, from their information, they believe to be the use of this massive database that we've talked about weeks ago, which would and it was remember it was some guy with a security firm that was charging $120 a year to let you know. But it turns out that individuals, I guess, were able to check, but corporations had to pay in order to make sure that their information wasn't vulnerable. And everybody felt a little creepy about it because you had to give them all of your information, like put it in your web browser.
You had to give them your passwords, which is crazy.
Exactly.
So I mean, there's reason to believe that isn't the source of the attack. It seems to be that this attack has been long going on, that Jonathan Zhadarsky has been tweeting a lot about this, and he believes that it was the iCloud backups from the victims' phones that were compromised, partly because of the kind of data, the names of the data. Apple said it was a very targeted attack on usernames, passwords, and security questions. So it feels to me like this might have been I bet you they were taking advantage of the lack of rate limiting on the Find My iPhone and just brute forcing passwords for particular people. If you say, look, I want to get Leo Laporte's iCloud backup, let's just guess. You need to guess or know the email that they use.
And yours is a big secret, Leo.
Yeah, mine's secret. One of the things Renee Ritchie said on Mac Break Weekly is that's a good reason to use an email that is not your first and last name.
Right.
At gmail.com, because that's the first thing people guess. And then you just keep hitting that, maybe with several people, maybe many people, just keep hitting that. And if you know who you want to get.
And when you have for a smaller organization, for example, such as Namecheap.com, an attack on them is going to make a big blip on their radar.
They're going to see
it.
But
with an organization as large as Apple, with the with the ecosystem as large as theirs, it's going to be as long as it isn't like a denial of service attack of guessing usernames and passwords. If it's just a trickle, and over time they crack them, then that's gonna slip under the radar. So it is. I mean. The really good thing that came from this is that something that should have had an account lockout now has one, though, again, it's a trade-off. Apple will, users are going to be inconvenienced, but, you could argue that, well, yes, they deserve it if they are unable to log into their account after however many attempts Apple has set. Do we know how many that is? Did Jonathan post?
On the new standard? I don't know. No.
Yeah.
Apple says to protect against this type of attack, we advise all and I think this is a clue, all users to always use a strong password and enable two-step verification. And be my guess, if you have a strong password, a brute force is going to be very difficult. So it'd be my guess that Apple's in a way hinting these people didn't have strong passwords and were not using two-step verification. Those things can be turned on. That's just a matter of changing your password and making it strong. That's what Zhadarsky posted on his tweet, is that people should not only do that, lock down your account, but to also delete your iCloud backups, of your iPhone and iPad, because that is apparently what people are grabbing. And it should be pointed out that if they got that, they got a lot more than just photos.
Yes. Yeah, the photos were just what was juicy that they were able to share. It's interesting too that this happened all at once. I mean, I wonder if this was a Labor Day release of data that was accumulated over a much longer period of time.
It's hard to tell because it was a backup. So a lot of the contents were old, some as many as 3 years old, but that's a backup, right? It may, if you kept it on your phone for 3 years and you backed up your phone, it's going to be there. So I don't think
it was also noteworthy that apparently some of the imagery showed people with non-Apple phones. And so, I mean, we don't absolutely know where all of this came from. We just know that iCloud seems to have been implicated.
Well, Zhadarsky says that the file names of it, he has at least one complete dump, and that file name indicates an iCloud backup.
Okay.
And nobody's talked about anything else except iCloud. I haven't looked at the pictures, so I don't know that there are non-Apple phones in them. But it feels. And by the way, from the information Zhadarsky is tweeting out, I think they're going to catch the person who did this. lots of information was left behind in this dump.
Good.
For instance, he knows what photo editor was used on some of these photos. There's a UUID in these files. There's a lot of information that law enforcement can use to get this person.
Really does sound like this had been pending for a while, that like this was all collected over time and then dumped out at once in order to make quite a big splash, as I guess it did. And it was posted to 4chan? 4chan, right.
And you know, there's nothing you can do much about 4chan/B. That's kind of a Wild West,
out of our control
there. And I don't know if 4chan's taken it down. Every other source has taken it down, and even people like Perez Hilton, who initially posted links, have taken their links down, realizing, you know, he says, "I am sorry, I should never have posted that." I think there's a general point attitude that this is a bad thing, and nobody wants to participate in this at this point.
4chan was charging $95 for access to them.
Were they?
So yeah, they were making.
I don't think that's the case. No, Steve.
4chan
doesn't do that. I don't think it was 4chan. I think it may be that the person who put this up offered it to for sale, and we know that they offered it to TMZ for hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't think 4chan does that.
I ran across that this morning in my research.
I don't believe that's the case. I think the person on 4chan may have asked for money. 4chan is a wide open forum. It's not, and I would be very surprised if Moot would do that. That does not seem like they're the kind of thing they would do.
So we do have a new, very, very worrisome Wi-Fi exploit against consumer routers. And this is another problem with WPS that we've spoken about before. In fact, early in 2012, our January 10th podcast, number 335, the title of that was Wi-Fi Protected in Security. And our longtime listeners may remember that there was a very clever hack that was found, and some software called Reaver was created. We joked at the time that apparently the guy who did it, who generated the hack, was a fan of Firefly, since the Reavers were, you know, some of the creepy bad people on the Firefly sci-fi series. And so you'll remember that the secret here was that the WPS key is 8 digits. It's an 8-digit code printed on the labels of many WPS-enabled wireless routers. And the idea is that if you provide this pin, this 8-digit pin, to the router, and so you're proving that you're physically present and able to read the label on the router. You provide the pin to the router through your Wi-Fi client, like running on Windows or something that has a WPS option, and the router will then provide your client with its passphrase, which is like so the whole idea is it's a simple way to prove you have control of the router, and it just hands you the passphrase, which allows you and encourages you to have a crazy passphrase that you're unable to enter conveniently otherwise. Okay, so the problem then was that, first of all, the 8th digit of the 8 digits wasn't actually information bearing. It was a checksum on the other 7. So we could kind of forget about that. So that left us with seven digits, and there are 10 million combinations of 7 digits for brute forcing. And if you made a mistake, if you typed in the wrong one, then the router would lock you out for, I think it was like 43 seconds for some reason. I mean, it's like, you know, some chunk of time. So that there was a penalty, but not onerous, for entering the wrong one, so that the typical user would be told to wait a minute, they'd wait, then they would fix their typo and hopefully put it in correctly the second time. The point is that lockout was a long enough delay that when coupled with the 10 million combinations of 7 digits, where the 8th one is, it can always be calculated as a checksum, prevented anyone from getting access to your passphrase. What was discovered back at the beginning of 2012 was a glitch in the protocol, and I'm sure as I went back, as I refreshed my memories, like, yeah, I remember this. There was a multi-phase handshake back and forth, and after the first 4 digits were put in, it was possible to determine whether those were right, separate from the entire 7. And that was the fault. That was the flaw. Because what that meant was that you could crack this in halves. There were only 10,000 combinations of 4 digits. So that's way fewer than 10 million. So you could brute force over some period of time. Average is going to be half of that, assuming an average pin. So an average of half that many guesses, so 5,000 guesses times the minimum lockout period allowed you to get the first 4. Then you only had the last 3. And so there's only 1,000 of those. So overall, in 11,000 guesses times the lockout period, a person could get in. And it worked perfectly for everyone who had WPS enabled. And at the time we said WPS was, not a good protocol. Clearly, a worrisome trade-off between usability and security. Everybody should turn it off. That was our advice then. Now what has come to light is a new problem. And the Dominique Bongard, who is the founder of Oxite Security in Switzerland, has made a presentation about this. So this is now in the public. And essentially, he has found for some routers, he can crack WPS in 1 second. Basically, just no time. Now, there are 2 classes of routers where he has found a vulnerability. The problem is that routers based on a Broadcom chip, and apparently that there's we're sort of at the first stage of this. Broadcom has been notified. The problem with the firmware, and in fact, this was the same problem we talked about 2.5 years ago, and that is they implemented the demonstration firmware. It was just it was the proof of concept. It was like, here's some sample firmware for how you would implement. I remember that this came from Intel, and it was like the WPS firmware, and it was like, do not use this, but here's some sample firmware, but we're not doing error checking and blah, 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 because we don't want to bog the code down with a lot of extra stuff you actually need to have, because then it'll be less clear what's really going on. So this was just the demo firmware that got written into the EEPROMs of these routers. Well, we sort of have the same thing, because it turns out that the pseudo-random number generator in the firmware of this class of routers that is based on the Broadcom chip is just a 32-bit simple linear congruential PRNG. And I've talked about the trouble with linear congruential PRNGs. That's one where you have a value and you multiply it by a constant and then add another constant to get the next value. You discard the you discard the overflow from that. And I mean, it's not cryptographically secure in any way. It produces an unpredictable number if you don't know the constants, unless you look at a few of them, and then any cryptographer can reverse engineer the constants. So, I mean, even if the constants varied, but they don't, they're burned into the code. So this thing produces a fixed pattern of, quote, pseudo-random numbers. I mean, very pseudo. And it turns out that the nonce which is generated by the access point at the beginning of the WPS negotiation is taken from the pseudo-random number generator, and then two other crucial nonces for the handshake, which have to be secret, are subsequently taken. Well, the act of taking the data from the pseudo-random number generator shows you its state. And so, the access point's first nonce used at the beginning of the handshake is public. So the attack is, you tell the access point you want to initiate a WPS negotiation. It hands you the nonce, which it just got from its lame pseudo-random number generator. That gives you the state of the pseudo-random number generator, and then you know the two secrets which it's about to obtain subsequently from the pseudo-random number generator. So it's possible in less than a second to completely compute the secrets that the handshake uses and crack the pin. So this is the condition of a class of routers based on the Broadcom chip. The other class turns out to be even worse, and Dominique has not disclosed the manufacturer. He's giving them the time to remediate the problem. That one is based on a linear feedback shift register. So it's a common technique used, again, for generating weak pseudo-random numbers, and they can be stronger than a linear congruential pseudo-random number generator. For example, cellular phones use linear feedback shift registers because they can run very fast. If designed well, they can generate very good pseudo-random numbers very fast. But if it's ever possible to know the state of the feedback shift register, then you know all of its future. It turns out that this router initializes the shift register to 0 whenever it's powered up. So cracking Wi-Fi that's protected by this one is as simple as somehow getting it to reboot. You could, for example, briefly interrupt the power, trip the breakers, as Dominique puts it, and then turn the power back on. The router will reboot and come up in a known state and generate absolutely repeatable pseudo-random numbers for its WPS negotiation, and again, you're in. So the takeaway is there is another bad WPS breach. We don't yet have model numbers and manufacturers. We only know Broadcom chip, and this other one is as yet unknown. But if anyone didn't turn WPS login or negotiation off in their router firmware 2.5 years ago, now would be a good time to do it. And I did check mine to make sure mine was still off, because things change over time. In fact, I think I have a different router than I did 3 years ago, and mine doesn't have WPS as an option. So I was glad for that. So it's, again, it may not affect everybody, but WPS has been a troubled protocol in the past. Its manufacturers responded by making a harder lockout and a longer lockout rather than fixing the protocol, which they actually couldn't change because it was already baked into the clients that were expecting it to be available. In some cases, you have to press a button to enable it, and then it's only on for some length of time. That's certainly better than if the protocol just sitting there wide open, happy to negotiate with any stranger who comes along, which is the typical case several years ago. So it's a good idea just to turn this off, or turn it on during the brief window of use where you're negotiating a WPS capable client to your router, and then turn it off again, because it's just a bad thing to leave on. Also in the news was several different reports of so-called stingray, which is the term they're being given, fake cell phone towers. Again, they're not towers. They're typically just base stations. But it came to people's attention that and there were some headlines that were a little bit overwrought, again, talking about how they could be used for installing malware in Android phones, which goes way too far. It does speak to the concern that we've talked about on this podcast before of the so-called baseband radio. That all cell phones, smartphones, have an operating OS that we talk about, Android and iOS and so forth, and another sort of a lower level real-time OS that runs the cell phone circuitry, the cell phone radio. And I mean, it's intelligent. It doesn't get nearly as much scrutiny as it should. It's just sort of clouded in secrecy. And so the concern is that there could be vulnerabilities there that haven't had the attention that the OSs that we're used to interacting with and that we run apps on have had. And that if you had malicious cell phone base stations or towers, that is, things mimicking real cell phone towers, then they could get up to some mischief. So it turns out that there actually is an infrastructure of these. The FBI, DEA, the U.S. Secret Service, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the U.S. Marshal Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the National Guard, U.S. Special Ops, and not to be left out, the NSA. All are known to have these things. They're on one website, there's a site called meganet.com that sells stuff into law enforcement and government. And they have something called the VME Dominator, is their name for this. And they said it's a real-time GSM A5.1 cell phone interceptor. It cannot be detected. It allows interception of voice and text. It allows voice manipulation, up or down channel blocking, text intercept and modification, calling and sending text on behalf of the user, and directional finding of a user during random monitoring of calls. The ACLU is all up in arms over this, feeling that it breaches U.S. citizen sovereignty. They have a map showing the 18 states in the U.S. that are known to have government facilities using this. And so, this is something that law enforcement uses for tracking people. Essentially, they're mobile fake cell towers that users' cell phones will associate with, believing that they are legitimate, and then essentially someone who is not the cellular carrier has decrypted access to the otherwise encrypted over-the-air data, which they're able to do anything with they want. So, for IME tracking, and I guess with a couple of these, you're able to pretty much zero in on the location of someone. So, yeah, you can imagine that the government is using this technology and taking advantage of the fact that so many people are carrying cell phones with them all the time. There is a new CryptoLocker clone. The site that we like a lot, really a great work by Lawrence Abrams. That's the Bleeping Computer site. And thanks to Simon Zarafa, who follows the show and tweets all of his findings to me for pointing this out. There's ransomware, which is absolutely not CryptoLocker, but it's now taking advantage of the reputation of CryptoLocker to call itself CryptoLocker.
That's funny. Now that's funny.
So it works nothing the same. I mean, it's completely rewritten, clearly from other people, uses a different network. It actually leverages Tor for its stuff. It puts a dot encrypted extension on the encrypted files, which CryptoLocker doesn't and never did do. They're charging 1.8 Bitcoin, which at the moment is about $864 US. And it says you've been infected by CryptoLocker, just because now everybody knows about that.
That's the brand.
And,
yeah.
It's CryptoLocker.
It's still strong encryption. It's the same effectiveness.
Yep.
Yeah.
It looks like it's bad stuff. It operates differently, though. As I said, it's very different. So there isn't the same sort of. It's not clear to me that there's the same sort of pre-encryption handshake. What we do know. And this has just been spotted in the wild, so it hasn't had deep analysis yet. But it puts a cookie, PHP sesh ID cookie, on your machine, so that when you then go to the site to make your payment, in order to get to pick up a downloadable executable that will give you your files back, your browser provides this PHP SES ID, PHP SESS cookie to, as part of its transaction to the site, which will then look you up in its database in order to provide you with the matching decryption for your files. And Lawrence noted in his blog posting about this that was yesterday, boy, I tell you, Labor Day was a busy day all around, that currently it is not deleting Windows Shadow Volume copies. So it is possible to do some recovery of encrypted files if volume shadow copies are still around from and containing files that this thing has encrypted. So anyway, it's looking like, as you said, Leo, CryptoLocker is becoming sort of a trademark of.
Well, we all know what it does, right? I mean,
bad ransomware. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, okay, CryptoLocker, that's bad.
That's bad. We know that's bad. Hey, let's take a little break if you don't mind.
Perfect.
Because I know we have more to talk about, including PGP, and if it's time to replace PGP, but I do want to talk a little bit about a security tool that you all ought to know about. If you don't, Steve's talked about it before. The idea of having of open VPN protecting you when you're on open Wi-Fi networks. And nowadays we know that since our ISPs are snooping on us, maybe we're always on an open network. ProXPN is a hosted open VPN solution. Steve approved. We wouldn't do it on the show if Steve didn't approve of it. It gives you kind of everything you're looking for. You could, we know that some of you are smart enough, Steve is, to run your own VPN server. So you can go to a Starbucks, for instance, and log into their open Wi-Fi and not worry about people snooping on you, surfing back to your home. Or maybe you're using the work VPN to do the same thing. That's fine. Not for everybody, certainly. not for me. But there's another reason why you might want to use ProXPN, because they're hosted all over the world. You emerge on the internet not from your personal network at home or at work, but from Dallas or Seattle or London or Singapore or Amsterdam. So it also eliminates any geographic restrictions, and it really does confuse your internet service provider. If your ISP is watching your home and watching your work, well, you don't have to worry about it because a ProXPN somewhere else. A really great solution. They also offer something that you may not have, which is mobile apps that give you OpenVPN on Android, which is very nice, and iOS. So, in some cases on a mobile platform, you have to use PPTP because they don't support OpenVPN. Well, thanks to ProXPN, they do. Protect yourself. If your ISP is the kind of person that wants to snoop on what you're doing so they can enforce the 6 strikes rule, or if you're blocked from using the internet services in other countries because of your location, this eliminates that. World-class customer support. They are a very good company providing just excellent service. And right now they've got a special offer. If you go to proxpn.com/twit, you can learn about it. The offer code SN50 will give you 50% off the monthly price when you sign up for a 12-month subscription. Half off, less than $5 a month when you sign up for a year. They do have a basic free plan that you can try, but I think it's nice to try the premium plan. Of course, they have a 7-day cancellation policy, a full refund after 7 days. So you might as well try the premium plan. Go to proxpn.com/twit and do use the offer code SN50 to get 50% off your 12-month subscription. By the way, you can pay with Visa. Yes, they still take Visa, PayPal, and Bitcoin. I like that. proxpn.com/twit. All right, let's continue on. Steve Gibson with his litany of security messes.
I was going to say my own particular use of OpenVPN is for authentication. Because I want, if I'm roaming, I want to be able to access GRC's internal network. Several times when I've been up in
businesses use it. Yeah.
Several times when I've been up in Petaluma with you, I've needed to tweak something on GRC's servers, and so I use the certificates as and of course passwords on top of that to authenticate me to GRC's network remotely. And I do the same thing for home when I just need to get to my network from when I'm out roaming around.
I am sure that's how most people first experienced VPN, is that's how they got into the office network securely from home.
Right.
And then they thought, I could continue to surf and I'd be looking like I was coming from the office. But why not? I mean, this takes it completely out of your own domain, even out of the country, which is, I think, a good way to do it.
So you and me talk about China's doing their own operating system.
Yes.
And because you've talked about it a couple times, and I just don't understand why they wouldn't adapt a regular Linux desktop environment. I mean,
think why
reinvent chopsticks?
Right. They were doing a Red OS some years ago. We knew this, based on Linux, a version of Linux. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if this new OS, who knows if it's written from scratch or based on a Linux kernel or what. I think if China's going to do an OS, they want to do it for a couple of reasons, mostly because they want to control it, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so you could certainly start with a Linux code base.
Oh, but God, I can't imagine not doing that. I mean,
so much good work has been done.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, open is not what China wants.
No, but I mean,
it's
open. Yeah, it's open in terms of it being a fully functional, beautifully designed, I mean, state-of-the-art, robust platform, and open in terms of them being able to scrutinize it to make sure there's no NSA tricks in there, which they can't do with Windows, inherently.
Or any closed source OS, right?
Right.
And I've made the point, and you probably heard it, that China has the expertise. There's so many good engineers. There's a billion people. There's so many great engineers there. And Paul Thurrott was saying, why do this? I mean, look how long it's taken to create Windows and make it robust and reliable. Yeah, but China has a little bit more resources than Microsoft.
Oh my God! All they have to do is stop attacking us and just work on their operating system.
I bet they can do both. There's also the issue of the language, which I mentioned to Paul, which is that the Chinese language is notoriously difficult because it's not an alphabet; it's ideographs, and that makes it very hard for everything. And it's one of the reasons they're actually very aggressively pushing English language education in China.
Yeah, the question for me is not why are they doing it now? It's not what took them so long.
Yeah,
I mean, it's with this obvious sort of adversarial tension that exists, certainly in the cyber level with the West. It's like, why are you using Windows of all things? I mean, that's crazy. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what it is. And I will note of Paul's comment that while it's true that it's taken us a long time to get Windows, I would note that we had Windows a long time ago, and that all Microsoft has done since is just to mess with it in order to make us continually upgrade it and generate revenue for them. I mean, it's not clear to me that this does a lot more today than 3.1 did. 20 years ago. I mean, yeah, it's fancier and it's got more I/O and memory and so forth. But I guess my point is that anyone starting today could do an OS from scratch because we know how to do that now. We really weren't sure how to do what we have today 30 years ago. There's been Microsoft is carrying a huge load of legacy forward in the same way that Intel is with an instruction set that they now regret. But both companies, Intel and Microsoft, are succeeding specifically because everything that they ever did still works, and nobody wants to give that up. So I'll be surprised if it turns out that this isn't a Linux-derived desktop environment. It's like, that's what I would do. They're not asking me, but it just seems clear.
Yeah, a lot of the problems have been solved. And let's not forget, Linux was written by one person, a graduate student. So, and, I mean, now, of course, there's a lot of other people contributing to it, but the Linux kernel itself was a single-person operation. Operating systems are pretty well understood by now.
Yeah, and in fact, a microkernel, there have been some really neat work recently on a microkernel where virtually everything, essentially anything that doesn't have to be in the kernel isn't. So it's a scheduler and it's process management. Everything else you can do outside in so-called user space and create a very robust, very small kernel that that computer science graduates could do as their their project.
Right. Simple enough.
So it turns out that outputting a QR code, Leo, is way simpler than inputting one.
Oh.
The reason I'm surrounded by webcams is that I decided that to make my Squirrel client complete, I had to allow importing of QR codes. For convenience sake, that the printed form of a Squirrel identity that I held up to the screen last week is both in a QR code and a simplified base 64 ASCII, so someone could enter that if they want to, but the QR code is simple. But say somebody develops or designs or sets their Squirrel ID on an Android phone or an iOS device first. I mean, if they download Squirrel, they get their ID set up, and they want to transfer it to their Windows machine. Well, arguably, there are ways to do that. Through email, and Windows has a file system, and so there's probably a way to do it. The simple way is to show your identity on the screen of your phone to your webcam on your laptop. And most Windows machines now, laptops have webcams built in. So anyway, I bit the bullet. I think it was shortly after the podcast last week, and oh my Lord. It's been an adventure. I've I'm nearly finished. It turns out that I tried to use the earlier standard for Windows, which is called, you'll remember, Video for Windows, VFW. And it's simple to use.
Wow, I haven't heard that in a while.
I know. Well, and so I figured go to the lowest common denominator. And the webcam
still in
that
Windows?
Yeah, Video for Windows is still there. And again, that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Microsoft.
Legacy.
You never kill anything.
Legacy,
Yeah.
exactly. And the other thing is, this all runs under Wine, so Macs can use it that have Wine, and Linux can use it. And I figured, again, lowest common denominator. If they've supported any kind of video stuff, it will be the oldest stuff, the Video for Windows library. Turns out, though, that my Video for Windows implementation came right up, and I'm looking at video from my webcam. But I've got a bunch of webcams. It didn't recognize any of the other ones. And so I was like, oh. And so then I found some random like video capture thing that I downloaded, and it recognized all of my webcams. So I thought, okay, I just can't, I'm not going to go halfway. So then the only way to do this correctly is with something called Direct Show, which is written on top of DirectX, which is written on top of COM, which is Microsoft's Common Object Model, which is, nobody likes who's ever programmed, and they've never done it in assembly language. So I've implemented all of that infrastructure now in assembler, and I now have webcams. All the webcams run, and I'm looking at video in a little window. And just last night, I ended up capturing the frames as they're going by, and now I feed it into a QR code recognizer. So, I'm close.
We should say this is just one implementation. People are going to be able to implement whatever they want, right? This is your reference implementation.
Absolutely. And, I'll be surprised if anyone else does it in Windows because, GRC will have one, which is absolutely complete. But I imagine they'll be for Mac and for maybe other ones natively for Linux rather than Wine implementations, and certainly Android and iOS. There's already one for Android, and I know that that there are people working on them for iOS, and then a bunch of people doing the server-side stuff. So I wanted to mention briefly two things that occurred over on the hard drive side. One was a question I got, why can't SpinRite be built into a drive? And also, what about an OS? And that's come up from time to time. And the reason is that a drive, while it's very capable, is actually not very smart. And one of the things that software running on a host computer can be is way smarter than the drive is able to be. And one of the ways you get smartness is from having access to huge amounts of memory. And when SpinRite comes to a so-called grinding halt and fires up its Dynastat system, that dynamic statistics system, it is taking samples of a sector which is refusing to be read and filling the system's memory with those samples and dynamically analyzing the samples in order to essentially reverse engineer what data was most likely stored in the sector that refuses to give it up. So that requires a bunch of sort of both heavy-duty number crunching and access to a huge sample pool that no drive could spend the money to have on board, and it just wouldn't make sense. So that's so really SpinRite and the drive are working together, where SpinRite is functioning sort of as the drive's brain extension in order to help it recover sectors that it's having problems with. And now, why not do that in the OS? And that may be something. I've always been thinking about that. The problem is SpinRite is now becoming multi-platform, officially with version 6.1, which I will get back to the second I finish the Squirrel client, so that it runs on Windows and I should say a PC and Mac hardware, both, and is OS agnostic. So SpinRite is still not caring about your operating system. It'll know in version 7 more about the file systems. But in order to build it into the OS, it would have to be running in all of these different kernels. And, I'm going to need something to do after SpinRite 7 is finished. So I think building it into the OS makes a lot of sense. So I think we'll get there. And lastly, I wanted to talk about a really interesting piece that I read about the end of RAID 5, arguing for why we need RAID 6. And it was, I thought it made a really good point. What's happening is, as drives have been growing in size, as we know they have been like phenomenally, the unrecoverable error rates have been creeping upwards also. So just because the bits have becoming so small in order to get these ridiculous, so you probably saw that Western Digital, I think it was Seagate, is now announced and I think they're starting to ship the first 8 terabytes.
It's unbelievable. I thought, as soon as I see that, I go, oh, Steve must be shivering.
So, well, the good news is 6.1 was benchmarking at, I think it was 2 hours per terabyte, which allowed it to do a 4 terabyte drive overnight. So that brings us back into feasibility range. And then 8 terabytes, of course, would be, 16 hours. But still, if you're working 8 hours during the day, you could start it at the end of your work day and it would be pretty much done. 8 terabytes by the time you need it again 16 hours later. So we're still okay. But yes, here's the problem. RAID 5 works by allocating one whole drive as parity. So what that means is if you have 2 drives, you add a third drive which contains the XOR of the first 2. And what that allows is any sector on any of those 3 drives can be unreadable. And it turns out you don't need that because you can XOR the data on the remaining drives in order to recover the data. So essentially, you've created a parity drive. And so a 3-drive array is not very efficient because you have 3 drives, but you've given up one completely, 1/3, just for the redundancy. But you can run like a RAID 5 with 6 drives, where one of the 6 is your parity drive. Similarly, there the cost of the redundancy is only 1/6 rather than 1/3, so it's twice as efficient. The problem is, if a drive fails, then you do the famous so-called RAID rebuild. And you may have noticed that RAID controllers have gotten smart. They don't even require you to normally build the array initially. They do a smart build where they only build as much as they need, just because building a RAID now on 4 terabyte drives, it takes forever, essentially. Here's the problem. With unrecoverable error rates having grown compared to the size of drives, if a drive fails and you must rebuild the RAID, during the rebuilding process, you have zero redundancy. And an error which occurs during rebuild cannot be corrected. So the argument is being made that we now need RAID 6. And as I've mentioned before in the podcast, that's all I run. I run RAID 6 on GRC servers here on my own desktop machine. That's my RAID configuration of choice. And what that gives you is 2 drives of redundancy. So you could lose one, no one would care. You could lose 2, and you could still recover all your data. And so just something to keep in mind, with drives being as inexpensive as they are, with controllers becoming more sophisticated, I would say take a look at RAID 6. If you don't mind sacrificing 2 drives for redundancy, if your array is large enough that 2 drives is a low enough percentage to give up, it's worth considering, just because drives are, being very, very aggressive about the amount of data that they're now storing on their surfaces.
Is that 8 terabyte drive just because of more platters or more data density?
That's data density. They've what they're doing is well. Actually, I may have to say platters, because they're the other thing that they've done is they've switched to helium inside.
Oh.
And helium it's reduced the friction of the platters with the environment. And I believe it also allows the heads to fly closer, and it has allowed them to put more platters into the drive. But as they lower the head flying altitude, which helium also does, that gets the head closer to the surface, which essentially gives it better focus. And so you also increase your bit density as a consequence of changing the atmosphere inside the drive. So, yeah, these things just refuse to give up.
We never thought that we'd get this kind of density. I mean, I thought, I remember by 2000, I said, by the year 2000, we'll be using some form of, holographic storage, because there's no way this physical spinning media could get dense enough. It's amazing.
It's so cheap, Leo.
Yeah,
My God, when you consider the cost per bit. Well, and of course, the phenomenon is the cloud and cloud storage. It's funny, too. I also read someone saying, and this refers back to MacBreak Weekly, someone said, rather than thinking in terms of the cloud, calling it the cloud gives people somewhat of a false sense of security. Think in terms of storing your data on someone else's computer.
Right.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're storing your data on someone else's computer.
Right.
So instead of just the cloud sort of sanitizes it as if like, no one has it. No, somebody does. Right. It's on somebody else's computer.
Right. That's a very good point. Do you want to...
You had one more sponsorship.
I do. Should we do that before we launch into the PGP?
Let's do it, and then we'll wrap with our PGP discussion.
Right. Well, it's the one sponsor on this show that Steve does not get behind. He likes to read his books
Audible
on a screen. I beg to differ, my friend. There's nothing like Audible books.
And Leo, I'm in the minority, I think, now. I mean, Jenny was talking about, she says, yeah, it's not very long. It's only 2.5 hours. I said, okay, wait a minute. When
how many pages
have we started when have we started referring to the length of a book in duration?
So she's an Audible listener, obviously.
Yep, she is.
You'll get there someday. You don't have a commute. That's one reason.
Yes, exactly. And actually, Jenny walks. She's got dogs, and she loves to walk her dogs.
And you have the amazing ability while you're on a treadmill to read.
I do. Well,
on
I have
a
big
Kindle.
screen. Yep.
And I don't get that either, because my head's going like this. On the other hand, in the gym, I pump the audiobooks in. So does Lisa. In fact, I know when Lisa's working out because I'll hear her Nora Roberts booming through the house. Audible is just awesome. I am we're Audible fans, many of us. Steve's the last holdout.
You can read all my books on Audible.
Well, that's the neat thing. You do a lot of Kindle books, and the Whisper Sync technology on Audible is phenomenal. You get many of the audio books when you buy them on Audible, they get a discounted Kindle book. I've been doing that with the Goldfinch, and so I can read. This way I get to read if I want to, lie in bed quietly at night and read. I can read it on my Kindle app, but then it synchronizes with the audio. So when I pick up the book to go to the gym, I pick it up right where I left off. That is a nice feature. And, of course, because Audible is owned by Amazon, everything comes out now at audible.com. Many of them, of course, recorded because a lot of publishers understand that there is a big market for this, recorded by the publishers. But Audible has also been doing a fabulous job of recording classics like science fiction that were never recorded. Here's Michael C. Hall, who I love, Dexter, reading Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Neat, yeah.
So you get a great actor. These are
fun to have his voice.
Well,
yes.
Exactly. These are performances, and that's what I particularly love about Audible. It's not just some guy droning on. These are very, very exciting performances by some of the best actors in the world. And Audible's been recording these classic science fiction, bringing back these classic books. They also have William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. In the play, in a performance for audio. They have the great courses now on audible.com, which I am very excited about. These are some of the best college professors in the world giving their lectures. The Great Courses is an independent company that they're providing all of their lectures now on Audible. So here's the deal. We know you probably going, well, I don't know. Is this right for me? Here's the deal. We're going to give you your first book free. In fact, your first month free. If you go to audiblepodcast.com/security now, you're going to sign up for the gold account. That's the book a month subscription. You get to Michio Kaku's Einstein's Cosmos. Oh, I love this stuff. How about this one? You Are Now Less Dumb by David McRaney, author of You're Not So Smart. So there's education, there's fiction, classics, there's biography, there's science fiction. It just goes on and on. Get that first book free. The hardest thing to do is going to be, which book do I choose? audiblepodcast.com/security now. You pay nothing for the first month. Cancel anytime in the first 30 days, and you will be keeping that book forever. You get to keep it. See, Whisper Sync Ready. So this is Watership Down, the classic by Richard Adams about bunnies. This is an amazing book. And you can get the Kindle version for a reduced price and then go back and forth. I just love Audible. audiblepodcast.com/security now. With the gold subscription, by the way, comes the Daily Digest of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, also part of the deal. New Peter F. Hamilton. I haven't read this one. The Nano Flower. It's another Greg Mendel book.
No, actually, that's old.
Is it?
Yeah, that's his. That's really good
I love
stuff.
the Mandel books. I love them. So I guess, see, this is an example of them. I read Mindstar Rising on your recommendation. This is an example of them going back and getting these classics.
With his side gland or whatever it was he had. He was able to squeeze some gland.
Awesome. We're big fans. I'll tell you, audiblepodcast.com/security now. Highly recommend it. It brought reading back into my life because who has time now? But there is time.
And I'll tell you, this advertiser and sponsor makes so much sense for a podcast because we have listening. People who we have listeners who are able to fit that into their lives.
Audiblepodcast.com/security now.
Take time out once a week for Security Now.
Yes. And you know what I do?
All of your
We're going to London in a month, Lisa and I, for a week, and I always get books about the place we're going. I read books about Venice while we're walking through Venice, and it just brings it to life. It's so much fun. So I haven't decided what books yet, but I will be going there and picking up some books. All right, let's continue on. Time to talk about email encryption. So
the impetus for this was Matthew Green, who describes himself in this context as a somewhat cranky cryptographer at Johns Hopkins. He started his blog posting from it's just 08. I don't know what day, but I think it was like maybe the middle, early to middle of last month of August, saying last Thursday, Yahoo announced their plans to support end-to-end encryption using a fork of Google's end-to-end email extension. This is a big deal, says Matthew. With providers like Google and Yahoo on board, email encryption is bound to get a big kick in the ass. This is something email badly needs. So, great work by Google and Yahoo, which is why the following complaint is going to seem awfully ungrateful. I realize this, and I couldn't feel worse about it. So a couple things. First of all, what Google has explained is they're very proud of what they've done because they've bitten the bullet, not for the first time, but they've bitten, a bullet of tackling crypto in JavaScript. And there's a famous blog, it's famous in the security community, blog posting, and I can't quite remember the title. It's something like, it's JavaScript considered harmful to cryptography. I just like that characterization. And it is the case that is difficult to control what is regarded as an automatic language. Our listeners will remember that last week I shared my retrospective on how difficult it was for me to be so careful not to leave any sensitive data around in the Squirrel client. Even local variables allocated on the stack, I would wipe them if they had ever contained sensitive data. The moment I no longer needed them, I would proactively zero them. And that's normally something that just sort of happens when you leave a subroutine, is the stack pointer is popped up over those buffers, those variables, and they sort of disappear, but they're still, the memory is still there. So it's like, not in my case. I'm going to wipe those out before I release them. Well, in a language like JavaScript, you have almost no control of memory management. It's doing that for you. It's keeping reference counts. It's figuring out whether you're still using this anywhere, and if not, it releases it. So it is a real exercise to create something which you can consider secure in JavaScript, that is crypto, and that's essentially what this post was talking about. Also, you don't have strong typing. JavaScript is a weakly typed language where it figures out the type, whether integer, Boolean, string, or a floating value from your usage, and also sort of freely mushes them back and forth depending upon your need. So all of this is sort of antithetical to writing secure code. Now, Google does note that in the event of Chrome crashing with this extension, which is providing these crypto services written in JavaScript, your sensitive data could escape in a crash dump. So it's like, oopsie, okay, well, that's a problem. But it's an example of what they just don't have control over, because they're operating in a several levels removed from the machine, where it's able to crash out from under them, and whatever they're doing at the time is part of the crash image. So, whoops. Still, they're very proud of the work they've done. I've been using traditionally, like for the other secure stuff that I did, the Stanford University JavaScript library, which is a bunch of crypto primitives, also written by really careful cryptographers who understood the challenge in order to get various sorts of crypto primitives finished. So we have Google and Yahoo, who are have announced their intentions of offering some sort of service. This triggered Matthew to sort of say, okay, here's the problem. These guys are implementing PGP, open PGP, but still basically a framework which is old. And so can't we do something better? Does it make, he sort of asks the rhetorical question, does it make sense in this day and age, if we're going to do something, to do PGP? And there are a number of problems with doing that. In the show notes every week, I try to find a fun picture. And in this week's show notes, the picture on the first page of the show notes gives you a sense of the relative key sizes of like old keys that we knew how to do then compared to new keys that we know how to do now. And the original PGP, I think it was a 3096-bit PGP key, is just this massive blob of crypto-looking text, whereas a state-of-the-art base 58 key, base 58 is the conversion from binary into ASCII that avoids the use of the non-alphanumeric characters that are, because you normally have only 62. You've got uppercase ASCII, lowercase, or uppercase alphabetic, lowercase alphabetic, and 0 through 9. That gets you to 62. Then you need 2 more, which are normally plus and backslash, or I think plus and forward slash, but then those are not URL friendly. So then there's a base 64 URL, which uses hyphen and underscore to get the last 2 to get up to 64. That way you can use 6 bits to a 6-bit character set. Well, this uses base 58. I'm trying to think who does that. I think it's one of the cryptocurrencies uses base 58. In order to avoid not only those two characters, but also 0 and uppercase O and L and 1. I think that brings them down to 58. But anyway, you can, with the state-of-the-art public key, it's just a tiny little string of ASCII that is even got, the confusing characters removed from it, and it has the same cryptographic strength today that this massive 3096 blob of public key did, PGP format public key did back in the day. So, and I know that you, Leo, mentioned that you've sort of moved over to SMIME. SMIME has the advantage of better integration into email clients, and it's able to use the traditional certificate authority public key infrastructure hierarchy or self-signed certs, where you just provide your SMIME cert to someone and say, we're going to communicate. Here's my certificate. And you can do things like, the recipient can take a hash of it, and then you just check to make sure that you've got the same signatures, and then there's been no problem with somebody getting in between and intercepting you.
Yeah, that's chiefly what I use both for, as a verification as opposed to encryption. Although once somebody has your key, they can do both. So that's nice.
Right. So
I have to say that the SMIME confuses people just as much as the PGP, because it's an attachment, a PS7S attachment.
Yes, and all of this, I mean, this is I think it's the overriding problem, is that the fundamental architecture of email was plain text.
Right.
It was never meant to be encrypted. And notice that none of this solves the tangential problem of metadata. That is, no PGP nor SMIME deals with who is sending email to whom. That's still all in the public. And so even though the envelope itself may have encrypted contents, the envelope is still being carried by the traditional, out in the open email transport system, which doesn't have security as its prime focus. So yes, your feeling is exactly what those people who have tried to use encryption come away with. So Matthew makes the point that regardless of the technology we use, managing keys, as he puts it, sucks. And there have been various things that have been tried. Recently, there's Keybase.io is a new experimental startup for like creating a secure place to store keys. But we've had key servers before. We've talked about the web of trust notion, where you have key signing parties in order to cross sign keys in order to sort of create your own non-centralized infrastructure of public keys. And then the use, because no one can check a public key carefully, and they're so big, traditional PGP keys are so big, then we use much shorter fingerprints. But the very fact that you need a fingerprint demonstrate that there's a sort of a fundamental problem here. And then we've got the notion of autonomous or automatic management. We've talked about how iMessage, for example, manages keys for users. And while that's very convenient, it also creates a loss of control. There's an inherent trade-off being made with the security of the system. We just assume that Apple is going to never slip a government eavesdropping key into the set that we receive when we send an iMessage. If they do, then somebody other than the set of recipients we intended is able to decrypt it. So really farming key management out to a third party where it's done with maximum convenience means it's done with some clear sacrifice of security. And then the other thing that Matthew notes is that none of this technology has any concept of forward security. This is something we've talked about on the podcast a number of times, and it's now becoming a bullet point that we really have to have moving forward. Traditional web server certificates, where the certificate was used to encrypt the conversation's symmetric key. We know that those are not safe. That model did not have forward secrecy, such that if someone obtained the certificate, if someone was archiving the dialogue, which they could not decrypt, and then later obtained the server certificate, they could go back and retroactively or retrospectively decrypt those conversations. That's no forward security. Forward security means that a compromise of keys cannot be used to decrypt past traffic. And unfortunately, both with PGP and SMIME, those protocols were designed back like the original web server SSL protocol without a sense of the importance of forward security. Today, that's a problem because we're in a world where it's entirely feasible for the NSA or whomever to be archiving vast quantities of encrypted traffic on the off chance that keys will become available later, and then they'll be able to go back and decrypt all of that past traffic. So Matthew's point is, does it make sense today to be implementing old although tried and true standards. And I think he makes the point with a series of examples, actually, that it doesn't. He asks rhetorically, what should we be doing if repeating the past is not that? So he suggests a proper approach to key management, some sort of centralized key management. He argues would still be better than nothing, and he points to some work that has been done with Signal or off-the-record protocols. He argues that forward secrecy really, for anything being designed today, it needs to be baked into the protocol, and that it should be any precondition of a secure messaging system. And for some reason, he has a picture of the Fresh Prince, which I guess was, I'm not sure when the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was airing, but he says cryptography that post dates the Fresh Prince.
That seems fair.
And he says enough said.
Yeah.
And the point being, this is that we are using really old crypto, and we know how to do much better crypto now than we did. And he finally says, screw backwards compatibility.
Yay.
Securing both encrypted and unencrypted email is too hard.
Yes.
We need dedicated networks that handle this from the start. And I think it was, again, something that I picked up on one of the other podcasts you were doing, Leo, where it was observed that today's user is very fickle. We are very there's a very low friction of adoption of some other service if it provides benefits. That is to say, leave email where it is. Let email be email. It is store and forward. It's got no metadata protection. It's difficult to encrypt because it's always being added on top, and it confuses people. If people want secure messaging, let's go elsewhere. And the point is, we've got clients. Clients are a dime a dozen. Ever since the Snowden revelations, the alternative secure things, sort of generically, are being announced daily. And so Matthew concludes by saying, okay, what's coming? There is great work being done that has nothing to do. Oh, I should mention that even though Google and Yahoo they sort of have an open PGP feel. I haven't looked at it closely, but I've seen, I think it was Matthew making comments that they're not fully PGP compatible. So they're like adopting old protocols, but also not maintaining full compatibility. So they're sort of, again, creating something not what we want for today. There is a protocol that Silent Circle is using called SCIMP, which is the Silent Circle Instant Messaging Protocol, where they're saying, we're not going to try to fix email. We're going to do a state-of-the-art protocol starting from scratch. So, and we've talked about Silent Circle. That's, on its way. Dark Mail is the effort by Phil Zimmerman, who, of course, famously gave us PGP. He's not trying to keep PGP alive either. He's looking at, how we move forward. He's working famously with Ladar Levison of LavaBit. And on their site, on the darkmail.info site, they say Silent Circle and LavaBit are developing a new way to do email with end-to-end encryption. We welcome like-minded organizations to join our alliance. And so that's in the process. Then there's something else, which is moving along over on GitHub. Adam Caudill has something called SMIMP, which is Simple Messaging and Identity Management Protocol, which, if you look through the bullet points, I mean, it is everything we could want. And in fact, the friend of the show, Taylor Hornby, whose handle is FireXware, has been involved in that effort and is given some credit for helping out with some of the security protocols. And Adam writes that SMIMP is a communication and identity system designed to address the modern threats that weren't considered when the traditional email system was designed. Transparent encryption, forward secrecy, simple self-hosting, auditable user information, and strong privacy are all baked into the design from the beginning. And not to leave something out, there's also another one called Mailpile, which is mailpile.is. Unfortunately, it's built upon OpenPGP. So I really like the idea of, as you apparently do too, Leo, starting over, coming up with a secure messaging platform. And I see nothing wrong with leaving email where it is. I mean, we don't have to replace it. We don't have to obsolete it. It has its place. And one of the things, for example, I just scanned briefly the SMIMP page, but I noticed, for example, that there was a proof of work as part of, again, baked into the protocol. And of course, that is anti-spam. You create a proof of work in order to make it expensive to relatively expensive, as opposed to like effectively zero cost to send somebody email. It's because email has zero cost that spam is a problem. If sending a message has a computational burden that is sort of proportional to your need to actually send it intentionally to another person, that creates a cost which prevents the whole spam, mass emailing phenomenon. So I do think it makes a lot of sense to look at a next generation protocol rather than trying to burden our email system, which just, sure, if you have no alternative, there are ways to encrypt messages, but it just never got off the ground because it was always a problem. And I think in this day and age, post NSA, where our needs are significantly more mature than they were back then. For example, forward secrecy. No one's going to really feel comfortable knowing that their PGP or OpenPGP encrypted email can be retroactively decrypted if they were ever to lose control of their keys. So OpenPGP doesn't do it. PGP can't do that. It was never part of the protocol. I think it really does and again, it also doesn't hide any metadata. So somebody can always see that you're interacting with someone else. So we will be, in years coming, maybe even months coming, keeping our eye on these developing protocols, because it looks like some really smart people are focusing on solving this problem for us.
We go full circle because the same problem really with email as with these photos in iCloud. The real key is to have encryption available to us for things that go out to the internet.
Yes.
And means to keep them encrypted. Trust no one. You've always said this. Pre-internet encryption, PI.
Yep.
And if you had encryption, you'd have control. The only way to control stuff with the cloud is to have trust no one encryption.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Apple's model does create a promise of convenience, and it's more difficult to pre-encrypt everything. You lose some features. For example, we've talked about cloud storage providers that give you the convenience of web browser access to your cloud data. Well, for you to have web browser access to your cloud data, you need to either decrypt that in the browser, or they need to be able to decrypt it for you. And the good news is, because now we're seeing it being feasible to do crypto in the browser, we're able to offer those features where before we really weren't. But yeah, we basically just want to consider that somebody else's computer, which is the cloud, is just storing noise, just absolutely pseudo-random nothing. And so if somebody did crack our accounts, all they're going to get is a bunch of noise that is meaningless to them.
Yeah. I think this is something we can solve.
I think we're on the way to it.
Because of public key crypto. You don't have a symmetric key. You really have a means to do this.
Right. And these, today's modern keys are so much smaller. I mean, they're so practical.
That. You should see the 2048-bit key block that I was using with PGP.
Well, people think something's broken. It's like,
what's that gobbledygook? Except now with S-MIME, I've got an attachment, as I said, a P7S attachment, and universally, Henry just said, "What is that attachment?" And I can't open it. And what am I supposed to do with it? And no one knows about this stuff. This doesn't exist. We need something a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah. I think the right solution is don't ask email to do this.
No.
Create an alternative platform that was designed from scratch with state-of-the-art crypto for that purpose. And maybe there can be a gateway between them, or maybe not. Because again, users have zero friction associated, from everything we're seeing. The clients will be free, everything will be free. So if you want to hold a really super secure private conversation, you do it over here. For stuff that doesn't matter, where you want infinite compatibility and everybody has an email address, you do it with email.
As always, you've cut through to the gist of the matter, the nub of the matter. Thank you, Steve Gibson. GRC.com is the place he hangs his hat and his spin right. You get a copy right there of the world's best file, hard drive, I should say, maintenance and recovery utility. You should also go there to get more information about Security Now, including 16 kilobit audio for the bandwidth impaired and full transcriptions for those who like to read along as they listen. Thank you, Elaine Ferris and Steve, for making those possible. It's also a good place to go if you have a question or a comment, because Steve doesn't do email. He has a feedback form. It's grc.com/feedback. Next week, security permitting, we will do a Q&A episode.
And we should make a scheduling note that due to the Apple announcement, the podcast has been scheduled at 1:30 rather than 1.
So what we anticipate, that's even soft. We anticipate roughly 2 hours for Apple. 10 to noon, we'll do the live coverage next Tuesday the 9th. Then we'll do Mac Break Weekly noon to 1:30 and get to you at 1:30, I hope. We'll certainly try to keep to that schedule, but one thing we don't control is Apple, so we'll do the best.
And believe me, I will be panting and watching the whole morning too. So
well, we have other shows after you, so we have to keep it all on a schedule.
Yep.
Good. Thank you, Steve. And I guess I won't be here the first Wednesday in October. Our first Tuesday in October.
We got all month. We got
plenty of time. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, plenty of time.
Hey, thanks, Steve. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Leo.
Bye-bye.